read one of his books or two, but it's been years ago.
Well, they're fun.
Dick Francis, yes, I remember that.
Together unto him the Pharisees and certain of the scribes which came from Jerusalem. Notice this is the second time when Jesus is being confronted by these people that the point is made that they came from Jerusalem. It's generally taken that doesn't just mean they were natives of Jerusalem or that they were residents of Jerusalem. It means they'd been sent by the temple authorities. They're here on a mission. They're a commission. They're coming essentially to evaluate Jesus. And they've already made up their minds about it, so now they're probably just looking for evidence to use against him. And when they saw that some of his disciples eat bread with defiled, that is to say, unwashed hands, they found fault. For the Pharisees and all the Jews, except they wash their hands off, eat not, holding the tradition of the elders. Now that seems that there's more to that than it seems. The Pharisees had developed a very elaborate sort of hand washing ceremony. It involved having a certain amount of water poured down the hands this way, then doing this with each hand and pouring water down the hands. And this was absolutely non-scriptural. The only scriptural things about washing of hands apply only to the priests and only on certain days. But only to priests and only priests when they were entering the sanctuary. These are some things from Exodus. But this is typical of how the Pharisees had put layer upon layer upon layer of further burdens, let's put it that way, on what were initially fairly simple laws. And when they come from the market, except they wash, they eat not. And many other things there be which they have received to hold, as the washing of cups, pots, brazen vessels, and things. Then the Pharisees and scribes asked him, Why walk not thy disciples according to the tradition of the elders, but eat bread with unwashed hands? Now, notice the repetition twice of the phrase, the tradition of the elders. What he's talking about here is, I know I've said this often, but it's so central to understanding what was going on here that I'm going to keep repeating it probably, that the Pharisees held as authoritative the teachings of previous rabbis. Now, they didn't all agree on which rabbis. There were different rabbinical schools. So by God, they knew that their rabbi was right. Okay? And that is what that's what they're talking about here. And they're quite open about it. I mean, they think this is a good thing. And your disciples aren't living according to the traditions handed down to us by previous rabbis, the traditions of the elders. He answered and said unto them, Well hath Isaiah prophesied of you hypocrites, as it is written, This people honoreth me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. Howbeit in vain do they worship me, teaching for doctrines the commandments of men. In other words, Jesus is denying the authority of the rabbis to some degree here. right? This may be an interest. I have mentioned before, I know, that the word hypocrites is actually a Greek word. And it had been taken into Aramaic. And it literally means an actor. But and think about how Greek tragedy, Greek theater was performed. They wore a mask. And the idea here is two-faced, maybe dog soldier, but anyhow, a mask. And what he's saying is that they are appearing outwardly different than they are inwardly. For laying aside the commandment of God, you hold the tradition of men, as the washing of pots and cups and many other such like things you do. And he said unto them, full well you reject the commandment of God, that you may keep your own tradition. This is a real change here in the way Jesus is dealing with his critics. Up to this point, he has not really directly attacked them, but this is a direct attack. He is saying, what you are doing is not just missing the point, what you're doing is wrong. And it's very wrong because you have replaced the clear commandments of God with the traditions of each of your own rabbinical schools, whichever schools they might be. For Moses said, honor thy father and thy mother. Obviously, you're all familiar with that from I'm sorry, I seem to have a bit of a tremor now. From the Ten Commandments. The other quotation, the other source, the source for whoso curseth father or mother, let him die the death. That's a relatively free translation of Exodus 21:17. This is a long period in Exodus where Moses is expounding on the law, where he's telling the people what the law is. So Moses said, honor thy father and thy mother, and whoso curseth father or mother, let him die the death. But ye say, if a man shall say to his father or mother, it is korban, that is to say, a gift, by whatsoever thou mightest be profited by me, he shall be free. Now, what this means is free of the obligation to support his father and mother, if, he says, the goods that would have been theirs, or the property, or whatever, that I have given to God. I've vowed it to God. That's what korban means. It's a concept that goes all the way back to the Old Testament. That korban means to dedicate. To call something korban means it's dedicated to God and cannot be used for any secular purpose. And that could be gifts of money, gifts of property, gifts of real property, gifts of animals, whatever. Any type of property could be declared korban. And if it were, then it would fall under the authority of, one supposes, would fall under the authority of the temple priesthood. So what he's saying is, under a cloak of apparent piety, you're not obeying your first obligation, your commandment obligation, to take care of your father and mother. And by the way, who's got a prayer book? Come on, we're Anglicans. Everybody must have a prayer book.
Yeah. What do you need?
I see some weird.
Decalogue. When we say the Decalogue in church, we don't say it. We don't
Say the rest.
say the whole thing directly as it is in Scripture. If you look at it, the next time you've got a prayer book in your hand.
I know what it says. That thy days may be long in the land which the Lord thy God has given thee.
Precisely. And we don't say that part. We don't say the whole text. We say a part of it when we go to the Ten
Father
Commandments.
Greg,
Ma'am.
this was one of the things that my mother fussed about, because when she was confirmed a million years ago, she had to learn all the fine print in each of the commandments.
Yeah, it's there.
And that was, of course, is one of them, one of the easy ones to learn. So she had me learn it. I can't say that I can recite all the parts of "Thou shalt not covet." That's pretty
That's the
complicated.
longest. That's the longest one. The usual understanding of this, what is sort of twofold. One, you ought to take care of old people if they need it, because one day you're going to need it, if you're lucky, and that your days may be long. You know. The other thing is God's going to punish you if you don't do it. So in either case, I'm covered both ways. Gotten to that point. And you suffer him no more to do aught for his father. He doesn't do anything for his father and mother now. Making the word of God to non-effect through your tradition, which ye have delivered, and many such like things to you. I mean, this is really hard. It's also true, but it's, you know, Jesus is really going it. He's returning fire here. And when he had called all the people unto him, he said unto them, now he's talking to the whole crowd, hearken to me, every one of you, and understand, there is nothing from without a man that entering into him can defile him, but the things which come out of him, those are they that defile the man. If any man have ears to hear, let him hear. That prophetic, that's what I'm looking for. That prophetic saying again, Jesus is taking the mantle of the prophet. And when we entered into the house from the people, his disciples asked him concerning the parable. And he saith unto them, Are ye so without understanding? Are ye so without understanding also? Do you not perceive that whatsoever thing from without entereth into the man, it cannot defile him? Because it entereth not into his heart, but into the belly, and goeth out into the draught, purging all meats. And he said, that which cometh out of the man, that defileth the man. Now let's stop right there for a minute. Let me point out, this is really attacking the heart of the daily practice of Judaism in his day. Because what he's saying, and it took, you know, the early church didn't quite get it. It took a while before they got it. You read all about it in Acts. He's saying, doesn't matter what you eat, go ahead, have the lobster, you know. But that's not going to demean you in the eyes of God. That's not going to make you unclean. That's not going to make you, you know, guilty. Well, you may be guilty, but that's because that's a dead work of conscience. This is really an attack on one of the, you know, everybody's going to eat every day if they're fortunate. In the angel world, maybe not. And keeping kosher is a very important part of, you know, the Jewish self-identity. And all this stuff about the washing of cups and plates, that goes along with that. That's part of the kosher rules too. So Jesus is really making a radical sort of statement here. One that would pretty much, I would think, raise the hairs on the back of the neck of any observant Jew who heard it. But he goes on to say, that which cometh out of the man, that defileth the man. For from within, out of the heart of men, proceed evil thoughts, adulteries, fornication, murders, thefts, covetousness, wickedness, deceit, lascivious, an evil eye, blasphemy, pride, foolishness. In other words, go ahead and eat the lobster. That's not going to make you. That's not going to make you unclean. You're already unclean. One of the hardest sells that we have in terms of getting people to accept what Christianity is and to accept the truth of it is that we do not believe that everybody is basically good. Quite the opposite. We believe that everybody's basically prone to evil.
Mm-hmm.
And we are only good by the grace of God. That all of the real evils come from inside our nature, our fallen nature. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Evil thoughts precede all else. And there follow a list of 12 things that make people unclean. He's really talking to the Jewish nation here in a very direct way. And from thence he arose and went into the borders of Tyre and Sidon. Once again, he's getting into Gentile territory. He's getting out of town. They're after him, and he knows it. Tyre and Sidon are two very ancient cities. They were Phoenician cities, and they have a very, very, very long history. Both of them were seaports. Both of them were very wealthy. And even in Jesus' day, they were still very significant places. Not as significant as they had been a few hundred years before, but still very significant. And he entered into an house. I'd love to know whose house. There must. I'd love to know whether it was a Syro-Phoenician. That's what they called it at that point, because it was ancient Phoenicia, but it was under the control of the Syria. Well, it was part of the Roman province of Syria, so Syro-Phoenician. Whether it was a Syro-Phoenician Gentile or whether it was a Jew living up there, we don't know. And would have no man know it. Well, we don't. But he could not be hid. For a certain woman whose young daughter had an unclean spirit heard of him and came and fell at his feet. There's that prostration thing again, the proskynesis. Falling to the ground, it's a state of extreme humility and dependence, or a sign of extreme humility and dependence. The woman was a Greek, a Syro-Phoenician by nation, and she besought him that he would cast forth the devil out of her daughter. But Jesus said unto her, let the children first be filled, for it is not meet to take the children's bread and cast it unto the dogs. A couple of things about this. This is a direct quote from William Barclay, okay? I'm reading it from William Barclay. You got that? To the Greek, the word dog meant a shameless and audacious woman. It was used exactly with the connotation that we use the word bitch today. To the Jews, it was equally a term of contempt. And there's something in the Greek that you cannot see in this translation. What you cannot see in this translation is that the Greek word here is kunarion, which means puppies. It's a diminutive of dog. And a diminutive in Greek is a diminutive is either affectionate or contempt or a sign of contempt. It's more a sign of contempt in Latin. But in Greek, it's usually a sign of almost affection. So it's odd that he would have softened that word. Okay. And she answered and said unto him, Yes, Lord. She agrees with him. Yet the dogs under the table eat of the children's crumbs. Now this is maybe not exactly a turning point in Jesus' ministry here, but it is something that's beginning to happen. Jesus has been convinced that his job is to come and preach repentance and the kingdom of God to the lost sheep of Israel. That his mission is to the people of Israel. And that the Gentiles keep showing up. And what he is offering to them, what he's offering to Israel, is he's equating it with bread. This word bread is interesting. The word here is artos. It can be translated as bread, or it can be translated as loaf, or it can be translated as food in a general sense. It usually means a loaf, you know, how the bread would be presented. But I tell you that for a reason. The reason I hope will become clear later. And she said, Yes, Lord, yet the dogs under the table eat of the children's crumbs. What are the crumbs? The crumbs are the thing that the people at the table don't bother with. They consider them trifling. They're not going to eat the crumbs. They're going to reject them. And they've rejected Jesus over and over and over. The leadership has rejected him. So much so, they've more than rejected him, they want to kill him. Don't forget that. He colors everything. What she is saying here, and what Marcus is saying, is that even the Gentiles are fed by God. And maybe the Gentiles are going to be fed even more than those who drop the crumbs. And he said unto her, For this saying, go thy way. The devil is gone out of my daughter. It's not often you see Jesus make a 180, but that's sort of what's happening here. His initial response is, no, you're not my problem. You're not my job. My job is with the people of Israel. But then he says to her, For this saying go thy way, the devil is gone out of thy daughter. And when she would come to her house, she found the devil gone out and her daughter laid upon the bed. I have looked and looked and looked. I kept thinking, that's got to mean something. That laid upon the bed, but I haven't found anything.
Sleeping.
I don't know why Mark includes that in here. Now, and again, departing from the coast of Tyre and Sidon, he came unto the Sea of Galilee through the midst of the coast of Decapolis. Here's what's happened geographically. Jesus has gone north to Tyre and Sidon, near what's today Lebanon. And then he goes back east again. He's really out of Jewish territory to a large extent. And they bring unto him one that was deaf, and had an impediment in his speech. And they beseech him to put his hand upon him. Who's they? I don't know. One assumes just the inhabitants of the area. And he took him aside from the multitude, and put his fingers into his ears, and he spit and touched his tongue. And looking up to heaven, he sighed, and saith unto him, Ephphatha, that is, be opened. Some interesting stuff going on here. Jesus is doing this, but he's not doing it in the presence of the whole multitude. I think it's reasonable to assume. It's always dangerous to believe that one's assumptions are fact, but I think from what follows is that it's reasonable to assume that he took him aside. It doesn't mean just the two of them out somewhere. because somebody had to see what happened. But rather that one or more of the disciples were with him. What is all that here? Okay. He sighed. Some translations will say he groaned. The word, groaned actually, I think, is in some ways maybe a better translation. I'll tell you why. The word is stenozo in Greek, and Paul uses it twice. Actually uses it more than twice, but two particular quotations from Paul's work that show what it means. One's from Romans. And not only they, but ourselves also, which have the first fruits of the Spirit, even we ourselves groan within ourselves, waiting for the adoption, to wit, the redemption of our body. And secondly, from 2 Corinthians, we know that if our earthly house of this tabernacle, meaning the body, were dissolved, we have a building of God, a house not made with hands, eternal in the heavens. For in this we groan, earnestly desiring to be clothed upon with our house which is from heaven. If so be that being clothed we shall not be found naked, for we that are in this tabernacle do groan, being burdened, not for that we would be unclothed, but clothed upon, that mortality might be swallowed up of life. The term groan here is, why? It expresses not just misery, not misery at all, really, but longing for something. And I think that Jesus is, I don't know, I think he is certainly longing for something. And looking up to heaven, he said, and he gives a command, Ephphatha, be open. Ephphatha is, of course, Aramaic, and once again, Mark assumes that there'll be a significant number of the hearers or readers who will not understand Aramaic, and so he translates it into Greek for them. And straightway, there's Mark, his ears were opened, and the string of his tongue was loosed, and he spake plainly. In Isaiah 35, say to them that are of a fearful heart, be strong, fear not. Behold, your God will come with vengeance, even God with a recompense. He will come and save you. Then the eyes of the blind shall be opened, and the ears of the deaf shall be unstopped. This healing of blindness, healing of deafness, both were seen as signs of the coming of the Messiah. And he charged them that they should tell no man, but the more he charged them, so much the more a great deal they published it. You'd think Jesus would have gotten a point by now that he couldn't stop them. And we're beyond measure astonished, saying, he hath done all things well. He maketh both the deaf to hear and the dumb to speak.
Dear Father Brad, would you speak a little bit louder?
Yes, ma'am. I apologize. In those days, the multitude being very great and having nothing to eat. So he's got a bunch of people following him around. Jesus calls his disciples unto him and saith unto them, I have compassion on the multitude, because they have now been with me 3 days and have nothing to eat. And if I send them away fasting to their own houses, they will faint by the way, for divers of them came from far. And his disciples answered him, from whence can a man satisfy these men with bread here in the wilderness? And he asked them, how many loaves, Marcos, have ye? And they said, 7. And he commanded the people to sit down on the ground, and he took the 7 loaves and gave thanks and brake and gave to his disciples to set before them. And they did set them before the people. And they had a few small fishes, and he blessed and commanded to set them also before them. So they did eat and were filled. And they took up of the broken meat that was left, meat, same word used for food, partos, meat, bread, food. And they that had eaten were about 4,000, and he sent them away. This is not a repetition of the previous story, the previous miraculous feeding. There are a lot of differences, and the differences matter. They really matter. Jesus introduces, the first thing he's saying is, they have been with me 3 days. 3. That's an important number in Christian symbolism. You've heard me talk about it before. I know you think I talk about number symbolism so too much, but the rest of this chapter will prove to you that I'm absolutely correct in doing so. Once again, his disciples say, well, what can we do? You know, how are we going to take care of this? We're out here in the wilderness. How are we going to get bread here in the wilderness? How many loaves have you? 7. 7. The number of divine perfection or divine completion. And he commanded the people to sit down on the ground. And he took the 7 loaves and gave thanks and brake and gave to his disciples to set before them. Once again, Jesus does not deliver the bread to the multitude. That's the disciples' job. And that's going to be their job as long as there are any disciples left. So they did eat and were filled. They took up of the broken meat, partos, that was left, 7 baskets. 7 again. And they that had eaten were about 4,000. 4 is another symbolic number. 4 symbolizes the earth and all the people on it. 4 directions. If you look at there are still around some very, very, very early Christian iconography in some of the churches in Italy particularly. And you will sometimes see in these very, very early churches that some of the saints have got nice halos, and some of the saints have square halos. The square halos means this person is still alive. The round halo means this person's dead and has gone to his reward. Again, it's an intimation that Jesus' ministry is not going to be limited just to the lost sheep of Israel. That it is for everyone. And straightway, once again, he entered into a ship with his disciples and came into the parts of Dalmanutha. I have wasted an extraordinary amount of time this week trying to find out where the heck Dalmanutha is. And what I have discovered is nobody knows. There are 2 or 3 different theories, neither of which commands a whole lot of respect. None of which commands a whole lot of respect. And we just don't know. We just do not know. And the Pharisees came forth and began to question with him, seeking of him a sign from heaven, tempting him. And he sighed or groaned deeply in his spirit and said, why does this generation seek after a sign? Verily I say unto you, there shall no sign be given unto this generation. Generation is a word that's often kind of misunderstood. We apply to it a very precise meaning, whereas in the Greek it's not quite that precise. To us it means, well, you know what it means, people born in a certain era, first generation, second generation. In the Greek it's a little different. It's hard to explain. I really can't explain it in English. It can be taken to mean a whole race, or a whole, and by race I'm talking about the human race, or a whole type of animal, or a whole type, the whole generation. To generate means to make, so the whole of things that are made. Nevertheless, Jesus is certainly saying that there's not going to be any sign given unto this bunch, because they're incapable of accepting the signs they've already seen. And he left them, and entering into the ship, again departed to the other side. Well, since we don't know where Dalmanutha was, we don't know which side it was on, but anyhow, he's gone somewhere. Now the disciples had forgotten to take bread, artos. Neither had they in the ship with them more than one loaf, artos. And he charged them, saying, take heed, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and of the leaven of Herod. Leaven is a funny thing. Leaven is yeast, of course. And in the Old Testament, in a number of places, and in some of the practices regarding Passover and some other things, leaven is considered to be somehow unclean. Even though it's okay to eat it the rest of the time, you can't eat it at Passover. And leaven is often used as a symbol for sin. The idea apparently is to put a little of it into the
Well,
yeah, but what's the word I'm looking for? Dough, yes. You put a little of it into the dough, and it works its way quietly, and soon it's diffused through all of it. So when he says the leaven of the Pharisees, he's not talking about their recipe for cookies. What he's talking about is the sins of the Pharisees, or the false teaching of the Pharisees, and of the leaven of Herod. Remember that when the initial decision was made, we're going to kill Jesus, it was the Pharisees and the Herodians and Herod's party. So he's distinguishing here between the Pharisees, and we all know what they were, and the Herodians, who appeared to, I guess the easiest way to say it is that if Herod had a party in that sense, or a movement, it would be those who were comfortable with making compromises with the Gentiles. And they reasoned among themselves, saying, it is because we have no bread. Not quite sure what they're saying there. I can't quite figure that one out. Has anybody got a translation that makes it clearer? I'm not quite sure why they would say that he could. Maybe I could think of a few things that it would be stretching it. It's sort of like saying, oh, that's sour grapes. He's saying we don't have any bread. Well, don't worry, we have bad leaven in it, didn't you? I don't know. But this is the point. And when Jesus knew it, he saith unto them, why reason ye because ye have no bread? Perceive ye not yet, neither understand? Have ye your hearts yet hardened? Having eyes, see ye not, and having ears, hear ye not? And do ye not remember? When I break the 5 loaves among 5,000, how many baskets full of fragments took ye up? They say unto him 12. Jesus is saying, pay attention to the numbers. That's what I'm telling you guys. Pay attention to the numbers, okay? Here's something I did find out that struck me as interesting. I talked about 12 as the number of people God 12 is the number of the tribes of Israel, and also about the showbread in the temple. I discovered just today in some reading, there is a scroll. It's part of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Dates to second half of the 2nd century before Christ. So it is among the portion of the Dead Sea Scrolls that is believed to have been hidden in 60 A.D. That was the date of the Great Revolt by the Jews against the Romans. Jerusalem came under siege, and apparently some people took some things out of the temple, or took them out into the countryside and hid them in caves for safekeeping. One of the things that was a portion of this is known as the Temple Scroll. It's the longest of the Dead Sea Scrolls, and it describes the temple ritual as it was in 60 A.D. and as it apparently had been for quite a while. And it describes as part of that ritual that 12 large baskets of bread were to be offered and burnt on the altar by the chief priest for Shavuot. Shavuot is Pentecost. It's generally referred to in English. The Hebrew is generally referred to in English as the Feast of Weeks, and it is one of the three obligatory attendance at temple for any Jew who can do it. Originally, it appears to have been a harvest festival celebrating the wheat harvest. The wheat was the last thing to be harvested. And later, it became conflated with the celebration of the giving of the law to Moses. So 12 has an even deeper significance than I realized. And when the 7, that is the 7 loaves, among 4,000, how many baskets full of fragments took ye up? And they said, 7. We were there, you know. And he said unto them, how is it that you do not understand? Don't you get what these numbers represent? How many questions did Jesus ask them? Why reason ye because ye have no bread? Perceive ye not yet, neither understand? Have ye your heart yet hardened? Having eyes, see ye not, and having ears, hear ye not? And do ye not remember?
Okay.
Sorry. Why reason ye because you have no bread? That's not one of the ones.
8.
Perceive ye not yet, neither understand? Have your hearts yet hardened? Having eyes, see ye not, having ears, hear ye not, and do ye not remember? And he cometh to Bethsaida, and they bring a blind man unto him, and besought him to touch him. Bethsaida means house of fish. I'm not sure how that fits in, but maybe it should. He took the blind man by the hand and led him out of the town. And when he had spit on his eyes and put his hands upon him, he asked him if he saw aught. And he looked up and said, I see men as trees walking. In other words, I see these vague vertical shapes moving around. After that, he put his hands again upon his eyes and made him look up, and he was restored and saw every man clearly. This isn't a random story, folks. It is also not a typical healing story. The most obvious difference here between most of the healing stories of Jesus and this story, the most obvious difference is that it takes place in 2 stages. It's gradual. Mark has no opportunity to use his favorite word, immediate. Okay?
It was almost like it was trial and error.
I don't think so. No, I think what's going on here is that this is a commentary on the disciples. That they see a little bit, but they don't see it all yet. They understand partially, but not completely. Flashing back just a little bit, I want to point something out that I should have pointed out 3 minutes ago. Do you realize how many times in this gospel we have read the word bread? More than 20. Mark's really hammering this home. This idea that Jesus as the Messiah will show forth that he's the Messiah by healings and exorcisms, but that much of what he will do will be feeding. And feeding not in a soup kitchen kind of way, feeding really miraculously. That there will be there is something happening here. And the constant repetition of 12, 12, 12. He's forming a new Israel. He's forming a new covenant, that's what he's laying the groundwork for. And the disciples are going to have to carry that on. So they are being taught, well, they're being shown, and he's hoping they're being taught, but they're certainly being shown. But they're not getting it all yet. They're trying. They're grasping at it, but they're not getting it. They're getting it in stages. Like this guy. And he sent him away to his house, saying, neither go into the town nor tell it to any in the town. And Jesus went out and his disciples into the towns of Caesarea Philippi. Now he's going out into Gentile territory again. And by the way, he asked his disciples, saying unto them, whom do men say that I am? And they answered, John the Baptist. But some say Elias, that is Elijah. And others, one of the prophets. And he saith unto them, but whom say ye that I am? And Peter answereth and saith unto him, thou art the Christ. Peter's eyes have been a little more open. Peter's realizing something that nobody else seems to have caught on to yet. And he charged them that they should tell no man of him. Once again, the messianic secret. Jesus is not denying that he's the Christ. He's telling them, don't say that. Why? And he began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected of the elders. That's already happened. And of the chief priests. That's already happened. And scribes. That's already happened. And be killed. And after 3 days, rise again. This is a major turning point in the gospel. Jesus is now beginning to teach them something they do not want to hear. Up to this point, they've been able to have their own ideas to some degree about what the kingdom of God would mean and what being a disciple of Christ was likely to mean. Now it's looking very different. Notice here again, he uses the term Son of Man for himself. And as I said earlier, there were multiple figures in the Old Testament who were seen as end of the world figures. And one of them, as we read in Daniel, was the figure like the Son of Man. Jesus is using that term for himself here. The Messiah was not understood by the people of the time. They understood him in different ways, but nobody expected him to come and suffer. Nobody expected him to be rejected by the people of God. But that's what Jesus is telling them. Peter says, you're the Christ, the Messiah. And he says, yes, but the Son of Man must be rejected. It's the same person. It's a redefinition, the beginning of a redefinition of what Messiahship is. It's a major, major turning point in I gotta turn this over. Major turning point in Jesus' dealing with with his disciples. And he spake that saying openly. So he said it to all the disciples. And Peter took him and began to rebuke him. Well, yeah, it makes sense. I mean, nobody could possibly have guessed that the one who was the Christ was destined to be shunned by the religious authorities and executed. But when he had turned about and looked on his disciples, he rebuked Peter, saying, get thee behind me, Satan, for thou savorest not the things that be of God, but the things that be of men. That term savorest, it's very interesting. It's as if Jesus is saying, you like and enjoy, or think you would enjoy, the things that are of the way the human mind works. But God is calling me to something else, and I have to like that more. I have to choose that. I'm being called to be a sacrifice. And when he had called the people unto him, with his disciples also, so this is those who've been following him around, he said unto them, whomsoever will come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. This is a hard saying to us, to the modern American mind. Take, references to a cross are metaphorical. Mm-hmm. These people had seen it. They knew what crucifixion was. And they knew what taking up your cross meant. As those of you who've been doing Stations of the Cross are very aware, in the standard sort of most common way of crucifying criminals, a hole would be dug, a deep hole, and lined with stones all the way around. So it would be, and then you have a piece of wood that would fit squarely into that hole, lying on the ground. The criminals were brought to the place of execution carrying the crossbeam. So these pictures you see of Jesus carrying a whole cross, he's carrying the crossbeam. And then they were nailed onto the cross, usually, sometimes tied on, and then the thing was pulled up with ropes and boom, down into the ground. Crucifixion was a horrible death. It could take days. And it was not only a horrible death, it was a degrading death, literally degrading, because you lost all status, and your family lost all status too. If you had any status to lose, it was reserved for the lowest of the low, generally criminals, rebellious slaves. That's what happened to most of the people who followed Spartacus. And for the Jews, it was particularly demeaning because people were always crucified naked. You were stripped of all humanity. And there are a couple of things about this that don't often get picked up. And this is, to me, the most important one. Let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. He doesn't say, take up a cross. He doesn't say, go out and look around and see if you can find a cross. He says, take up your cross, because everybody has one. Maybe more than one for some folks. What he is saying is not, go suffer for the sake of suffering. He's saying, you will suffer. Make it count. Make it be for something. Give it some meaning. For whosoever shall save his life shall lose it. But whosoever shall lose his life for my sake and the gospel's, the first time that word has appeared here, the same shall save it. I've heard Father John preach on this, not because this verse, but this idea quite a few times. And people who look for meaning, satisfaction, and fulfillment in anything less than God will be frustrated. If they don't achieve it, they'll be frustrated thinking they failed and they should have achieved it. And if they do achieve it, they'll see it doesn't work. Because what we're looking for, I'm pulling deeply on some of the early Greek philosophers here. What we're looking for is a harmony with God.
Sorry, what?
A harmony with God, to be in tune, to be in sync, and to find our true place in the order of things. And when people think, if only X of something worldly, I would be happy, they're wrong. Because they get the Porsche. And then they think, it's okay, I like it, but there's still, maybe a Ferrari would do it for us. And then they go, you know. And it's the same thing with people who are sort of addicted to making money, or it doesn't matter. The world can never satisfy you because you weren't made for the world. You were made for more than that. And Jesus offers us more than that. Follow him, and there will be more. What shall it profit a man if he gain the whole world and lose his own soul? I don't know where it originated, but there was an idea, a literary idea. It's not in the ancient literature. It's a story that sprang up sometime, I think, in the medieval Renaissance period, about Alexander the Great having defeated King Porus in India, sitting down and crying because there were no more worlds to conquer. Well, there were other worlds to conquer. The Chinese would have shown him a thing or two about that. But nevertheless, the idea is sound. I'm going to deviate here. We got plenty of time. This is one of my favorite stories from antiquity. You've all heard the term Pyrrhic victory, right? Okay. It's named after King Pyrrhus, Pyrrhus of Epirus, who was one of the successor kings to Alexander the Great. And the story about Pyrrhus is he had accepted a call for help from one of the Greek cities in southern Italy to come over and help them fight against the Romans. And he was living in Sicily at that time, which he had taken. And he had a very, very, very close advisor and friend, whose name I can't recall at the moment. And they were sitting in the garden of Pyrrhus's palace in Sicily, with having a few wines. And the friend said to him, "Okay, so we're going to Rome to fight these. So we're going to Italy to fight these Romans off. What next?" He says, "Well, the Romans are about the best there is in among all those little Italian city-states. And if I can beat them, I'm pretty sure I can beat the rest of them and get all of Italy together." "Okay, what do we do then?" "Well, then I'm going back to Epirus, just a place in northern Greece. And I really need to retake all of Greece and put that into my hat too." "And then what?" "Well, then definitely Egypt. Egypt is ready. Egypt is rich. We're going to Egypt and we're going to take Egypt and I'm going to be king and pharaoh." "Okay." And after that, not much left but Carthage, maybe Spain. "And after that, well, then I'll have pretty much the whole world. And after that, well, then you and I can just enjoy ourselves and have a few drinks. We're doing that now." It's a great story. Enough is sometimes enough, good or bad. "Or what shall a man give in exchange for his soul? Whosoever therefore shall be ashamed of me and of my words in this adulterous and sinful generation." And that doesn't just mean the people alive now, it means the human race. "Of him also shall the Son of Man be ashamed when he cometh in the glory of his Father with the holy angels." The word ashamed there is kind of difficult. I think one of the great weaknesses in the Anglican tradition, and I am pretty heavily Anglican, one of the great weaknesses in the Anglican tradition is that because, the causes don't necessarily matter. One of the great weaknesses in the Anglican tradition is the unwillingness of Anglicans to talk about their faith.
Talk about what?
To talk about faith in Jesus Christ. We are not good at it. Among ourselves, even, there's a certain amount of hesitation. And I'm not quite sure exactly why that is, but it is one of the weaknesses of the tradition that people are unwilling to even let it be known that they are Christians. I wish that more of us were more willing to engage people on a regular basis on questions of faith. Now, I'm not talking about beating them over the head with the Bible or whatever. But what I mean is, when someone asks you a question and you know that your answer is based in part on what you believe about yourself and your relationship to God, that you say so. And that's becoming increasingly rare and increasingly dangerous.
Don't you think that that's a characteristic of all of us? I mean, not just the Anglicans. Don't take all the guilt for yourself.
You know any Baptist?
I think that's a common flaw.
I don't. I think the evangelical Protestants are much more committed to that than Anglicans are. And I'm, again, not sure why, but it just seems to be something in our DNA. In any event, I wish it were different. And it is becoming increasingly socially and politically dangerous to be openly a person of faith. When U.S. senators can tell candidates to the Supreme Court that they're a little too Catholic to be on the Supreme Court, that's not so good. I'd like to stop here. We'll finish chapter 8 now because I'm not really prepared to go any further. When we started this thing, I said it would be 60 minutes to 90, and so we've passed 60, so I haven't cheated you. At least I hope not. I will not be able to meet. Yes?
Going back to the comparison between the two miraculous feedings.
Yes. You see so.
I'm feeling like one of the do you not yet understand? And I'm not sure I understand. I mean, I see the difference between the 12 baskets, and I see that one was 7. I see that one, there was a boy who contributed what he had, and that was distributed. And then this was just how many do you have? And they also found a couple of fish.
And there's no number given,
No,
which is, yeah.
I mean,
Okay.
is there more there than I'm sort of going?
Okay.
But where they were
Give me
is a
back.
great deal. One was the initially he was,
Speak up.
the initial one was to the Jews, and he was
And it was
not
Israel.
successful there. Then he took it to the Gentiles, the other side. Of
Okay, so it's in two different places.
2 different places
And
to
two
2 different
different-
groups of people.
Okay.
It was more. He was more. The group was more receptive to the Gentiles than the Jews. The Jews were too hard bound. They had everything they needed. Thank you. and so it was the Gentiles who really realized, it seemed to me, that they had nothing. And here was an opportunity.
Thank you. I should have pointed that out, and I didn't. I realized, and I skipped that, that this was, the first one is in the land of Israel, and the second is outside of it.
Yes.
It also goes to your point where you said
Dramatic
the woman whose daughter had the devil in the crumbs. And
Yes.
and
I'm
starting
sorry.
the change of his ministry into realizing maybe this is more for the Gentiles.
All right, Claude, turn around and say the same thing again.
I said this is because it goes back to the woman with the daughter who has the devil, and she tells him about the crumbs that the dogs, the puppies,
Okay.
and that's when he said, well, that's the big changing point, because now it's looking at the Gentiles.
Right.
And everything
Absolutely
starts
right.
revolving, going back towards the Gentiles.
It would start moving outward.
That's right.
And,
Okay.
and
And
in
then-
all directions.
Remind
Jesus
us
goes
of
north, west,
the
and south.
number 7 was referring to what?
7 is the number of divine completion, or divine perfection.
When
God built the
when
world
Jesus
in 7
mentions the word dogs, but it's actually the Greek word for puppies.
Yeah.
Is there some indication that or some hint that the Gentiles are at sort of a lower level of of education by Jesus? He has not preached to them. They're more, let's say, less well versed in what Jesus has to say than the Jews are, or than in God literature. So they're puppies at a level that is lower than the Jews, which are more at a mature level of
The
knowledge.
Jews are God's chosen people,
Yeah, so
and
And they have all this knowledge.
they have the accumulated knowledge of the years that they have been
the
studying,
Gentiles
and
are-
yet they have deviated. They
Whereas the
brought in
Gentiles
man's
are more-
rules.
Gentiles are more at a lower level of
That's
knowledge.
exactly right.
I'm just wondering, is that-
untrained.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah, okay.
And, sir,
Is there any significance in there being less left over the second time?
the significance is in the numbers.
Sim.
The first time, it's 12, the number of the people of Israel. The second time, it's 7, the number of divine completion.
And the 4,000, which indicates the whole world, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And and I hope you are all listening when Jesus said to them, "Don't you understand the numbers?" Numbers really do matter in this world. And they really mattered to the Greeks. They really mattered to the Jews. The Romans, not quite so much. But the Greeks particularly and the Jews particularly put a great deal of emphasis on the symbolic value of numbers. Ma'am.
You talking to me?
Yes,
Yeah.
ma'am.
One of the things that I have found with this discussion, and in the last couple of times here with Jesus talking to the Gentiles and bringing his gift to the Gentiles, was that in previous Bible studies we talked more about Paul and his journeys and that sort of thing, and it was brought out that he went to the Gentiles. He brought that to the Gentiles, which would imply, at that point, we were implying that Jesus wanted him to go to the Gentiles, when in fact, Jesus himself went to the Gentiles.
Right.
Yes,
Say, I mean, that to me is more important than,
I would have to agree. Shoot, I lost my thread. That happens all the time.
Well, the
Oh, I
Jews,
know it. Give me a second, Jerry. Well, that's what I was kind of referring to when I made the point after the healing of the man with the speech impediment, that the disciples are generally are growing in their understanding, but even the early church is still growing in its understanding after the resurrection, because one of the themes in the earlier part of the book of Acts is about the question of, can Gentiles be a part of this fellowship?
right.
Jerry, I'm sorry.
Well, that was the point that I wanted to make, was that the early church, even Jesus' closest associates and his brother and James and all those people had to be beaten over the head with it by Paul before they recognized that Jesus had indeed come to the whole world.
But wasn't just Paul. Remember Peter's vision of the clean.
Oh,
and
Peter and
uncovered.
Cornelius and all those, yes, those important things. But
Oh.
Peter received the version, the vision. He didn't make it up.
No, exactly. I find Paul difficult because his syntax is so weird sometimes, and I kind of have a hard time understanding what he's saying.
Have you ever-
Sentences and
Have you ever listened to a rabbinic discussion? We have been to the bar mitzvahs of the 3 sons of a good friend of ours from college who was Jewish, very religiously Jewish. And each of the bar mitzvah boys gets up and gives a talk about what he's learned about whatever
His faith.
topic it is he wants to talk about. And boy, I'll tell you, the first time I heard one of those, I said, "That sounds just like Paul." It goes on and on and on and on with semicolons and all that stuff.
You have
well,
internet, right?
the thing to remember.
Yes.
YouTube, Manus Friedman. He's a rabbi. Okay, you got to listen to him.
Speak up, Jan.
He's good.
She's saying Manus Freeman, a rabbi, is
Manus
good to
Freeman.
listen to.
Well, had we not talked about before, was it the Gentiles that were more the slave category? That they had more to gain by having an afterlife?
Slave?
Gentiles were enslaved. I mean, now.
Well, who were the slaves that had come up before that?
Anyone that was conquered. became slaves.
I know, but were they primarily Jews or were they
No,
not?
whoever was conquered, whoever they happened to be, in Italy and
Remember the
Romania.
people in Tyre and Sidon were
Yeah.
wealthy?
Some of them were, but there were slaves too.
Right, but I mean, they weren't,
I
they were
think
Gentiles, but they weren't poor.
Yeah, that's right.
But they
No,
had
no,
everything to lose spiritually, is what
Yes.
they're coming to the
Right.
conclusion.
Right.
exactly.
But
Don't forget, this is
The Jews had slaves too, didn't they?
Yeah, but they had a lot of ambivalent
It's a
feelings
different kind
about
of
it,
slave.
and it was not nearly as common
Okay.
among the Jews, and they weren't allowed to take Jews as slaves.
Okay.
Sir,
I have two questions, if you don't mind.
please.
One is, do you think the word generation, that's a poor translation?
I don't know that there is a translation that would be any better,
Yeah.
but
It means, in a given context, the whole human race, or
yeah.
a whole
a society,
People.
it's, as I understand it, it's a society, it's everybody now, groupthink. That we have an understanding of how to react and how to
I'll do some
enumerate
research on the word this week. It's a tough word for me to get my head around. We use it in such a specific manner that we have forgotten that it can be used in other ways as well. Now, it is, you will hear it occasionally used in another sense, but almost it's the first thing, word association, the first thing you're going to think of is people about my age, if there are any left. But yeah, I
This is
think
full of-
it's a tough word to try. It's one of these Greek things where it's a word that can have more than one meaning, and it's polyvalent, that thing.
okay.
It's really it's a tough one for me to get my head around. I'm sorry. I wish I could
No,
be more
that's helpful.
literate on it.
My other totally unrelated question is, when you said that, you said Jesus sort of did a 180 back in chapter
Which one?
7, verse 25 or thereabouts, with the woman who says even the dogs eat the crumbs. Doesn't that hinge a little bit on whether we believe Jesus anticipated how she would respond? Because if he knew how she would respond, it softens what he's saying. He's sort of giving her a chance to show her humility at a moment where a lot of people could have felt pride. If he had no idea what she was going to say, then that has a different kind of suggestion. But
Yeah, that's a possible reading. I can't deny it. But it seems to me the more obvious reading is that he I wouldn't say so much changed his mind as expanded his vision. Here's part of it. Let me give you the sort of background on this. I forget where it is. Somebody help me out. Some of you with a more Protestant background than me will know. Where is it in the New Testament that Jesus did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped, but emptied himself and became?
Corinthians?
Is it
Robert.
Corinthians? I don't know.
Rob,
That was
that was one of the things I just talked about
that you just read.
No.
as lector this past Sunday.
Oh, good. Okay.
So that's
Well, emptied himself, taking the form of a servant.
yeah.
Did not consider God.
The idea is that the idea of the full humanity of Christ is that despite being divine, he voluntarily divested himself of many of the powers of divinity, let's put it that way. And he is very, very quick in many places to say, not me, but my Father. I believe that Jesus suffered from every human limitation, let me put it that way, in terms of knowledge. He undoubtedly, Jesus didn't know that North and South America existed. Of course he did. He didn't. Well, God knew, but Jesus in his incarnational sense didn't. And part of being fully human is growing in knowledge and judgment. And I think we see Jesus growing in a sense. Not changing his essence, which is obedience to the will of the Father, but going from being someone who sees his mission originally as simply calling Israel back to a truer faith in order to enter into a newer, in order to be a renewed, changing from a vision of a renewed Israel to a vision of a new Israel, put it that way. And in that context, where is it? What we just read. In that context, I have to wonder at what point did he come to realize what he told the disciples, that the Son of Man must die. Because he's fighting that, or he's dealing with that right up until the last minute on the cross. And being a priest and doing, reading these things a lot, and being somewhat emotionally susceptible, I guess, to me, the absolute hardest thing to read in the entire New Testament, or all of Scripture, is what's known as the cry of dereliction. Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani. My God, why have thou forsaken me? It gives me cold chills. And the point of it is, or part of it is, Jesus was a man born to die. And he was not only born to die, he was born to suffer. And he suffered all of the things that human beings can suffer. Or most of them, anyhow. Including that sense of abandonment by God. And if there's anybody in this room who has never had the thought, I think God has lost my file somewhere, I'd be very surprised. And the fact that I don't think, that's not a show, that's for real. He's not doing it as an act of drama. That's what's being wrung out of him. And I don't think he could have foreseen that when he was walking around in chapter whatever. Ma'am.
2 answers. Number 1, I've always presumed that Jesus' frequent habit of going off by himself and praying for long periods of time, he was getting more information and more understanding from his Heavenly Father. But number 2 is, don't you think that cry on the cross is a quote?
It is a quote.
It's a quote of the psalm that then goes on and describes the crucifixion.
Yeah, to a large extent, it is.
If you read it, you say, they punctured my hands, they scoffed me, everything else, it's all there.
You'll hear it tomorrow night. Psalm 22.
Yeah.
Tomorrow night. Maundy Thursday.
It's hard.
It is hard.
I often think about, just how we tend to emphasize the physical aspects of the crucifixion, but there are aspects far beyond the physical. And it's very interesting that the prayer book uses the phrase often passion and death. Passion meaning suffering. And the suffering is not just physical. It's the suffering of being betrayed. It's the suffering of having failed. It's the suffering of being publicly humiliated. It's very Lenten, isn't it? Now, I need a couple of minutes to talk to you all. I've made up my mind that I'd probably better not meet with you next week. I have a bit of a surgical procedure I have to undergo on Tuesday. And I know they're going to keep me overnight, at least one night. So, you think I've been in bad shape before, wait till you see me next week. But I think by the following week I ought to be able to do what I should be doing and want to do. But I will not be, I just can't commit to meeting next week.
Okay.
I might, maybe I might
You're
be
excused.
able to, but I can't commit to it. And rather than say I will and then not, I'd rather go ahead and make it clear that I'm going to ask y'all to bear with me and give me 1 week.
So April
to
10th.
not do it. Whatever that would, 10th would be correct. So anything?
Well, it's
so-
also tax time, so people could probably use next week to get that out of play.
Anything else? That would be good to have
I
a
have
little bit in the
I
hall
have a
tonight.
slightly more lighthearted interpretation of Jesus and the woman with this Syrophoenician woman.
Yes.
And she's like Cherry Carneal. She was not. He makes the statement about I'm only here to speak to the children of Jews, and she says, but even the dogs. She's sparring with him a little bit, and he
Absolutely.
likes it. He likes it, and he paid her.
Yes, he does. And notice what he says. He doesn't say he says because of this saying, because you're willing to speak up.
All of chapter 8 is beginning, is all showing that he is divine. He starts because when he heals her daughter, it's one of the first ones where he doesn't physically go and heal her. He says she's healed.
I had missed that. You're right. It's the first one in this.
And then later on, you
Good.
get into where he tells his disciples, do you not hear? Is your hearts hardened? Then you go a little bit further, and then that's when Peter says, oh, well, who am I? And he said, you're the Christ.
You're the Christ.
So you begin to see in that one chapter where Mark's going.
Any of you who are really gluttons for punishment, if you want to do something interesting with Bible study, get a copy of Matthew and look at how Matthew treats the same stories. Sometimes he just picks up Mark whole and, cut and paste. But sometimes he makes changes or additions or takes things out. And it shows a different sort of focus. One of the things, what brings that to mind is that in Matthew, this story also occurs.
Mm-hmm.
And Matthew has Peter say, thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God, which is slightly more, so you can think about that one. Yes, ma'am.
I have a great book that I had in school called Gospel Parallels. And
Yes.
it lays them out,
I've got it.
the three. So you
Yeah,
can
it's a
see
very
them.
thin little volume like this,
Yeah.
and that's pretty much what it does. It shows you the three synoptics side by side. The synoptics being Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And it's really interesting, and it shows you the different emphases of the different gospelers. That's a kind of a mandatory seminary text. Well, thank you all very much. You all have been sharp tonight, sharper than I was. Pardon?
We don't know any Greek.
Yes, you sure did. They all went boom. Hey, Jeff.